believe that you can start with the scientific evidence, start with historical evidence, and the best explanation of that evidence would be that the Earth is not too far from 6,000 years old. And that can be something that you propose merely as a scientific hypothesis. You don't have to start with the Bible. You can throw out as a hypothesis, compare it alongside to the hypothesis of the standard secular model of the universe being over 13 billion years old and say, well, which one of these two hypotheses best fit the evidence? That is a scientific endeavor. And so even if you might filter out what young Earth creationists say because you think they're motivated just by clinging to some old ancient book, that in itself isn't an argument against the evidence that is found out there in nature and history that supports a young Earth perspective. Now, you may use that perception of young Earth creationists to sort of filter out what they say. And there's so many voices in the world that we have to use some type of heuristic filters to filter out what people say. But as regards the arguments against a young Earth perspective, it isn't an argument if you think that they are just motivated by clinging to what their particular religious community thinks is a holy book. So I would ask that you consider it as a scientific hypothesis. And that said, a second thing I would like to get to has to do with the issue of uniformitarianism, because a very standard procedure in regards to scientists do in their operation or their carrying out of their scientific endeavor is eliminate appeals to the miraculous and also interpret past historical events in light of what is operating today. Charles Lyell and his idea of the uniformitarian principle of interpreting what we see today, or interpreting what happened in the past through causes now in operation that are known to produce those effects. And so you might say, well, if a young Earth creationist proposes that there was accelerated radioactive decay or that God created the world out of nothing, well, those things aren't what we see happening today. So if you adopt a uniformitarian principle, then you would rule those out. I would make 2 or 3 comments in regards to that. One has to do with the idea that if you are actually searching for the truth, you're not going to adopt a principle at the start of an inquiry that automatically rules out possible explanations for what actually happened in the past. So if what you do when you start out in your endeavor of asking the question, what really happened in the past in regards to how long the universe is, how long mankind has been around, how old the Earth is to say, there's a possible explanation out there. God created the world around 6,000 years ago, and there was a flood and accelerated nuclear decay, and we're just going to throw that out of question because we don't see those things happening now. That is not showing any love for the truth. If you love the truth, you're going to approach the subject with a principle of explaining the evidence that doesn't, from the beginning, rule out possible explanations. So if you love the truth, I would ask that you have an open mind in regards to the interpretation of the evidence and don't adopt a principle that rules out possible explanations from the get-go. Now, let's suppose that we do adopt the uniformitarian principle. Then I would still say, in that particular case, you should consider a young Earth perspective in light of 2 things. One, when you look at the intelligent design community and the scientific inference from present causes now in operation, the production of information, when we take information, specified information in the world, and whenever we trace it back to its source, inevitably we find an intelligence behind it. And we see that today in operation. So when we go back to Earth's early history and we see the genetic code and all the specified complexity and information in the genetic code and epigenetics, the best explanation of that, given that the only cause that we know of to produce that amount of information is intelligence, the best explanation is intelligence. And it's legitimate to reason from effect to cause when there's only one known possible explanation of the effect in question. So when you look back and you see the development of life and you look at the fossil record and you see these gaps between fossils and you don't see any significant transitional forms for at least almost all of the organisms there had to, the best explanation for that increase in information is that intelligence was behind it, which means that an intelligent designer injected that information into the biosphere. And unless you're willing to admit the possibility that aliens did this and did this multiple times throughout the history of life, in which case I wouldn't take you seriously, and I don't think many people would take you seriously, then the best explanation is that there was a non-material intelligent designer that injected that information into the biosphere. If you were to take, for example, an evolutionary perspective in which all the organisms weren't created at the beginning, but they developed over time. So even when you take it from a scientific perspective and you look at the evidence and you trace back, you come to the conclusion that there's an immaterial intelligent designer who injected this information into the physical world, that he, an immaterial being, muddled with the physical world that we have. That's a scientific perspective. If that's the conclusion you get, then you can say, well, we can reason from what we see in nature that an intelligent designer exists who did these things. He has, an immaterial being has the capacity to monkey with the physical world, to move particles around and form them in a particular way that he wants. So even if you adopt the uniformitarian principle, my recommendation to you would be the best explanation for the injection of information into the biosphere is that an intelligent designer has actually put things into the world, put information into the world, moved particles around. So that shouldn't be ruled out because we see that in the nature that we have. The second thing that I would say in regards to the uniformitarian principle is this. There's good philosophical reasons to conclude that the human being has a body-soul dualism, that we are immaterial beings with free will, moral culpability, that our immaterial soul is able to impact the physical world. It may be only a small part of the physical world, namely some part of our bodies that is impacted, but it is still an immaterial causation of some effect in the material world. So even if you suppose that you didn't have all that information about intelligent design, you have from your own firsthand experience of you impacting this physical world as an immaterial being, the knowledge that an immaterial being exists, yourself, and is able to impact that world. And you didn't give yourself that ability to produce those impacts in the world. Some other being had to have given you the ability to impact the physical world, which means that there's some other non-material being that is powerful enough to make it so that you have that capability. So, from your own firsthand experience, you know that an immaterial being can monkey with the world, namely some part of your body, you affecting some part of your body, me some part of my body, and that there's some other immaterial being that has the power to do the same. And he brought you into existence, or at least if your soul has always existed, if you believe that he's the one that gave you causal access at some point in your soul's existence to the physical body that you have. So if you want to still hold on to the uniformitarian principle, fine, but it shouldn't rule out the consideration of the hypothesis that there's an immaterial being that acted in nature to create nature, or if you think that nature always existed, that has been able to form that nature around 6,000 years ago to form Earth, to form people, to form animals. So that's my legal brief, so to speak. If you are someone who doesn't believe in Christianity, or you're a person from an old earth perspective, to even if you hold on to a uniformitarian principle, which I don't think shows a love for the truth, still consider the hypothesis that the earth is only around 6,000 years old.
Thank you for listening. Credible Faith is a global missions-minded apologetics ministry with content available in 7 different languages across 7 websites: German, Russian, Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and English. If you would like to support the global apologetics work of Credible Faith, go to crediblefaith.org and click on the donate icon. If you would like me to give an apologetics workshop or participate in a debate at your university, or if you would like me to give a Great Commission missions conference or apologetics conference at your church, get in touch with me through the Contact Us section of the Credible Faith website. You can also submit a request through the website to get Credible Faith's monthly email. If you are a native speaker of Russian, German, Italian, French, Spanish, or Portuguese, and if you notice that an essay from the English website is not available on the Credible Faith website for your language, feel free to get in touch with me about translating the essay, and I would read through your translated material for quality control and the desire to see content from the essay made available in your language. Thank you for listening, and have a great night.